What's going on, everybody? Stained Glass Assassin back with issue number 3 of the Simpsons comic book guy. Now, ask and you shall receive. Like I said, I know it's been a while since I put one of these up, but I definitely have been, working on this. So here we are. Now, just a quick recap. If you recall from the previous issue, and I'll put the links to the other 2 issues at the end of the video here, but we saw the final panel of the Geek Nerd Civil War about to pop off with all that cool cosplay, and this issue picks up right where that issue left off. So let's just dive into the story, shall we? On the very first page, we see just how much the Geek Nerd Civil War has spiraled out of control because they're now downtown, outside the Lard Lad Donuts, and we see them spray painting all over the place. And of course, it's going to be geeky references such as E equals MC squared. We've got pi equals 3.14. And naturally, the cosplay is still going on because we see Obi-Wan up there battling a Three Musketeer. We see Spock down there. But of course, the main attraction of this panel is that Chief Wiggum's cruiser has been lodged atop the Lard Lad Donut mascot. Now we see Homer down at the bottom who's, yelling out, "Hey, Chief Wiggum, I want to file a complaint." Now you remember in the previous issue I mentioned that Homer and the milkshake machine at Krusty Burger was going to be playing a role in each issue. So they do a good job of kind of sprinkling Homer and the milkshake in here and there in the next, this issue and issue number 4, so you don't forget about that. He says, "The milkshake machine at Krusty Burger hasn't worked in weeks. I pay your salary, and I want you to arrest someone and make them fix it." And Wiggum tells him basically go pound sand. However, as he's still up there with Lou, he realizes just how dire their situation is, so he kind of yells out the window, "Hey, you nerds and geeks, stop fighting." And we got 2 kind of Obi-Wan characters going at it, and he says, "Make us. You're as helpless as a one-armed wampa." Shocked, Wiggum says, "Ah, man, I'd give anything to stop this gang war." And someone behind him says, "Anything?" As they turn, they see that Homer has climbed up and says, "Listen, if I solve your gang problem, you owe me a favor." And, Wiggum says, yeah, sure, that works. So naturally, Homer steps out of the car and says, "It shall be done." Now, later that day, he's sitting on the steps of City Hall with Lisa, talking about, he says, "Well, so Lisa, you said there's going to be a huge nerd and geek rumble outside of City Hall today." And Lisa responds, "Well, yeah, that's what I told you earlier today. That's why we're here, right?" And he basically says, "So when is this all starting?" So Lisa turns and says, "I'd say about 5 minutes ago." Now, of course, this panel looks almost identical to the final panel of issue number 2, where we see the nerds and the geeks about to, Braveheart style rush each other. But this time things are a little bit different. We see that the geeks are comic book characters and the nerds are historical figures. On the historical side, we've got Gandhi, ironically. You got Abe Lincoln, you've got Marie Curie, you've got Albert Einstein, Benjamin Franklin. And of course, on the geek side, you've got Superman, Krall, Spock, Captain America. So it's nice that they kind of kept that whole theme up, but then they threw a little bit of a curveball and had, the nerds take more of an educational side of things. So that was kind of cool, I thought. So seeing that the war has started, Homer realizes it's time for me to put an end to this. So he stands up and shouts out, "My friends," but no one pays attention. So then he ups it to "gentle social outcasts." Still nothing. Getting fed up, he shouts, "Hey, listen up, jerks." And then finally he resolves to yelling out something he knows will get everyone's attention by saying, "Jar Jar Binks was the greatest Star Wars character ever." And I love everybody stops and just gasps. And he says, "Good, I've got your attention." Unfortunately, Homer has bitten off more than he can chew because now the geeks and the nerds can kind of unite because they have a common foe. And you see them here approaching Homer. "Get him, slay the blasphemer." And you see Homer say, I just wanted to talk." And he shoves Professor Frink. Now Frink responds with, "Oh, sweet Clavin, a bully type pushing. A nerd and geek's one weakness." So Homer responds, "Really? Well, there's more where that came from." And immediately, "We surrender, as do we. Draw up the terms of peace and we shall sign them." And later that day, we see them signing a gigantic peace treaty. And you see Wiggum in the background pushing. Why didn't I think of that? Now, it's at this point that the story is kind of almost the exact halfway point. It's a 5-issue miniseries. This is like point, 2.5. This is kind of where it's at. But things kind of shift from the geek culture reference, kind of the fallout of comic book guy's death, to more of a mystery. I mean, we see the titular character supposedly die in the very first issue, so it's going to be tough to make an entire 5-issue miniseries about comic book guy, which is no shock. And as I said, it's more of a mystery from this point out, or like almost like an investigation, and it focuses more on the main characters, Bart, Marge, Homer, and Lisa. Not to say the other characters aren't involved, but you'll see a shift from kind of all that fun, geeky reference to more of a, it feels more like a Simpsons episode, if you will. But I digress. Let's get back to the story. The focus now goes to Bart, who's still in search of a new hobby because, if you remember, once Marge inherited the android's dungeon, she kind of ruined it for him, so he can't go back to the comic book store. So he starts off by going to Reverend Lovejoy's house, and when he knocks, Lovejoy's excited to see him because he thinks that he's there for an exorcism. And you can see here, he's all ready to go. He's got his Bible, he's got his hockey mask, he's got a super soaker full of holy water, but he quickly realizes that Bart's not there for that reason. And when he tells him he's there for a new hobby, Lovejoy is more than happy to welcome him to the exciting world of model trains. However, Bart is not impressed, and he asks, why are these interesting again? And we see Lovejoy a couple panels of him trying to justify why they're interesting and why he even enjoys them in the first place, which leads to him trashing his entire collection and telling Bart, do me a favor, never come over and ask me what's interesting about the Bible. So strike one for Bart. He then goes to the arcade and hopes to play some video games, but he sees that Dolph, Kearney, and Jimbo, along with Kearney Jr. up there, are essentially hogging all the arcade machines. Strike two. Then he heads over to Milhouse's house, where he tries to get him involved with stamp collecting. And here's the interesting reference, because he says, I tried stamp collecting, but got bored and fell asleep. Now, I'm not sure if this is a reference to the episode Homer the Vigilante, where you remember that was Sam Neill's character, Malloy, who played the cat burglar. And after he robbed the Simpson household, Bart makes a reference that he even stole my stamp collection. So perhaps that's a reference to that, perhaps Boothby just remembers that episode, or it could just be a coincidence, but either way, it's a nice little nod. Bart even is so desperate that he goes over to Data's house, who's trying to explain a, quote, simple game that he came up with, but it's very complex, to which Bart is, not impressed, he's not interested at all. Having no luck, Bart decides to go fishing. On his way home, he runs into his mother cleaning the outside of the comic store, and she has a suggestion. She says, you know who's great at filling time? Grandpa. I'm sure he's taken up lots of hobbies since he's retired. And Bart responds, well, wow, I'm actually desperate enough to go talk to him. And of course, a few moments later, we see him outside of Grandpa's room at the retirement castle. As he knocks on Grandpa's door, he shouts out, go away, I'm not doing anything. So naturally, Bart just opens the door and says, are you okay? Now, Grandpa, who's in a very interesting position, which I'm sure all teenage boys have been caught in at one point or another, he says, Bart, close your eyes. So we don't know what's going on until Bart kind of runs forward and says, you're knitting? And Grandpa responds, you've discovered my secret shame. But to everyone's surprise, Bart thinks it's cool. He says, you made this? It's cool, man. And, Grandpa says, I learned it in the service. Now, I just want to point out that that sweater looks eerily similar to Freddy Krueger's. I'm not sure if that is like that, but it would fit perfectly with this comic. Anyhow, Bart's interested, so he says, hey, can you show me how? And Grandpa's more than happy to do so. And we get a few panels of Grandpa showing him some techniques of how to knit, different stitches, different knots, all that type of thing. And an hour later, Bart has successfully knitted his first scarf, and he says it's awesome. So as he's leaving, I love this little advice that Grandpa gives him. He says, and remember, keep this a secret. Tie off your stitches, and if a German jumps you, take the needles and stab him anywhere that's soft. You got it. So it looks like Bart has found a new hobby, which he has, and it will play a role later, not only in this issue, but the next 2 issues as well. You will also remember that I mentioned that there's a kind of a side mini, and when I say mini, I mean literally it's only like 8 panels or 12 panels over the 3 issues of Nelson kind of being infatuated with Marge's mothering abilities, and he feels as though she could be a replacement mother. And as the store's about to close up, Marge says, well, it's 6 o'clock, time to close up. And Nelson says, oh, already? And she says, "You've been a big help around the store, Nelson. I'll see you tomorrow." And he responds, "You sure will, Mom." And she, "What, Mom?" And he says, I said, "Ma'am. I mean Marge. I mean Mrs. Marge, ma'am. Oh, gotta go." And he runs out and slams the door. As I said, it's small, but it is kind of a nod to one of those previous episodes. Now, after a long day of presumably cleaning, we haven't actually seen any sales. Marge puts her head down and falls asleep. And in doing so, she slips into a dream, which is called Little Marge and Foul Ball. Now, this is a Little Rascal themed artwork and everything dream that takes place. It's about 5 pages. Now, I'm not going to go over the entire kind of mini story here. I'll just go over the basis of it. Obviously, you want to read more, please, seek out this issue. But so long story short, the gang is outside of Moe's clubhouse, which is a no girls club. Obviously, Marge wants to get into this club, and we find out that there's going to be a baseball game between Homer, Moe, Lenny, and the gang versus Mr. Burns. Winner gets the clubhouse. Naturally, Mr. Burns is going to cheat, and we see he has an entire team of Major League Baseball players playing for him. The twist here is we learn that Marge is an ace pitcher, so they have to figure out a way to get her to join the team so they can win. And, like I said, the story goes on, and the story concludes with Marge expecting to be let into the club. And someone behind her says, "There's something I need to tell you." And she says, "I'm in the club?" And he says, "No." As she turns around, she sees a Little Rascals version of the comic book guy, and he says, "I'm not dead." So naturally, she springs up from her nap, and she says, "Whew, what a strange dream." But as she looks towards the entrance of the comic book shop, she sees comic book guy standing there saying, "Seriously, I'm not dead." And she shouts again. Fast forward a few panels, we see Lisa falling asleep and slipping into her own dream. Now, obviously, her dream is a lot different. As we see here, she's essentially got unicorns, we've got the happy little elves, and they're saying, "And so, for saving our kingdom from the gumdrop goblins who didn't believe in gummy global warming, we crown you Princess of Ponyland." And she says, "Well, that's nice, but a monarchy is still a flawed system of government." Typical Lisa, very, kind of the buzzkill. But anyhow, they say, "And to celebrate, we'll have a pop quiz that shall be graded immediately and be on your permanent record." And she's happy. That's, obviously so Lisa. But as she gets the papers, they blow away, and she quickly realizes that they're not test papers, they're all comic books. And all the comic book covers, we see Cyclops, Flash, Batman, Captain America, and Buffy. Everyone's saying, "I'm not dead, I'm not dead, I'm not dead." So naturally, she screams and falls out of her bed. And when Marge comes in to see what happened, Lisa says, "Mom, this is going to sound weird, but..." And then we pan over to the next page, which we see everyone at the cemetery. And Marge says, "A trip to the cemetery to dig up comic book guy's grave? You're right, Lisa. This is weird." You gotta love the Superman logo on the casket, as well as you'll notice Bart handing out mittens that he knitted for everybody, which obviously ties in his new hobby. Naturally, the early pages come back in full circle here because we see Chief Wiggum mention that, "I don't like doing this, but we owed your father a favor after he stopped the gang war," obviously when Homer climbed up and, said, "You owe me a favor." And of course, now that the body's dug up, which was done by groundskeeper Willie, who also dug up Jebediah Springfield's grave in Lisa the Heretic, he opens it up, and everyone takes a look inside, and they're horrified. And Homer says, "Ew, that's going to make it hard to eat bacon for breakfast tomorrow." And Marge responds, "I can make oatmeal." I said hard, not impossible. So we see Professor Frink say, "According to my spectrometer, and by that I mean my eyeballs, these are the charred remains of the species Grandis dorcas. I could run a DNA test if you'd like." And Lisa says, No, I'm sorry, I brought everyone out here." So just like in that episode with Jebediah Springfield, it appears that she was wrong when she dug up the grave. Now, naturally, we know she was right in that episode, so we'll see what happens later. As they're walking away, Homer mentions that, what would make you feel better? A milkshake. And we see Homer back at Krusty Burger getting the old runaround with, "Sorry, our new milkshake machine still isn't working." And Homer, with his Mr. Plow jacket on, is outraged. Now, we're getting to the tail end of this issue here, where we're at this Springfield police station, but Lisa still suspects something's just not right. So, as she's down there, she says, "Chief Wiggum, can I take a look at any evidence relating to Comic Book Guy's death?" And, Chief Wiggum says, "There isn't any. It was an accident. Case closed, if it had ever been opened." Lisa just has a hunch. But Wiggum explains to her that he has a pile of unsolved murders, they're stumped. So dejected, she kind of leaves and she says, I'll just keep looking into comic book guy's death myself. But Chief Wiggum stops her before she can leave and says, I'm afraid I can't let you do that unless you take Ralphie along with you. And he explains that we were going to hire you as a babysitter anyway, so this kills two birds with one stone. Of course, that's another reference to the episode My Sister, My Sitter, where Lisa becomes the babysitter of all Springfield, ultimately being Bart's babysitter, which he then does a bunch of bad things to get Lisa in trouble. So, nice little nod, a nice little reference to another episode there. So, the final panel shows Lisa and Ralph walking out of the police station, and that's how issue number 3 ends. That's going to about do it for issue number 3 of Comic Book Guy. Now, you'll notice this review is a little bit different because, well, one, there's not quite as much geek culture reference as the previous 2 issues, but also, I don't want to show you every single panel of the comic. I definitely would like you to go out and read if you enjoy this review, because there's a lot more going on in this book. I'm not going to spoil everything. For instance, there's a whole page of Bart trying to conceal his knitting from Lisa. And there's a lot more panels going on of kind of banter and talking while they're at the graveyard. Some more scenes early when I showed you Chief Wiggum and Lou, who are stuck up on the police car. So there's a lot more dialogue between the characters that I didn't show. Not to say they're not important or not interesting. It's just, again, I don't want to show you the entire comic because I want you to take the review, enjoy it, and if you did enjoy it, go read it for yourself because there's a lot more going on. As for the writing, Boothby, again, nails it. I mean, it feels like the characters come right from the TV show, and again, I'm not sure if he intentionally does it, but he makes those kind of references to that, the stamps from the Homer the Vigilante, or the babysitter reference from My Sister, My Sitter. Maybe that's just coincidence, but either way, I wouldn't put it past Boothby, who has, like I said, a very rich history writing the Simpsons comics. I've always given credit to the artists on this because everything just looks spectacular, but I also want to give credit to the everybody involved. Pencils, inks, lettering, it all looks good. It all pops off on you. It catches your eye. There's really nothing aesthetically unpleasant about this series. And it goes that way for a lot of the Bongo comics, The Simpsons. So they fit that cartoony kind of vibe, and it works. So I got nothing wrong thus far after 3 issues with the story, the writing, or the artwork. So I'm giving that 2 thumbs up. But anyhow, I'm going to end it here and hopefully get started on issue number 4 shortly. But in the meantime, let me know what you think down in the comments. Have you read this? Are you interested in reading it now? Either way, let me know what you think. While you're down there, like and subscribe so you know when the next video comes out. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.